Good evening and welcome to the show. This is the First Amendment, historically speaking, and my name is Frederick Douglass Dixon and I will be your host. Today, I would like to take sort of a reprieve of our normal formatting where we forward to you just historical facts and historical atmospheres of different times and tie it into today, tie it into what it is that has been a part of this week's current events and how it ties historically, and furthermore, what we'll see in the future behind certain paradigms that seem to be overwhelming and seem to be at this particular point a stalwart of American society. So I would like to thank UPTV for giving us this time and space and all of the laborers that make this particular place run the way that it does, very professionally. And I'd like to thank Daniel as well. He's always a very huge help. And when we begin today's talk, I would like to talk about some things that you've probably heard. It's been overwhelming in the news about some young college men who were using the word that everybody's a little afraid to talk about and using the N-word, as we would say. And just how this particular thought was the way it came across the media. And I still don't have enough information to find out how this particular taping was forwarded. But when we talk about using the N-word in today's society and we tie that into being a post-racial society, I think it's quite obvious that that is not the case. And if this is a post-racial society, then even if the word is used in a negative and a derogatory term, as critical thinkers, we should be able to discuss it. We should be able to find exactly what it symbolically means right now, today, and be able to compare and contrast it historically. And those folks who have, for the most part, had learned behaviors that allows them to use this particular term and how it has been historically and how it is today, meant for only one particular group. So when we talk about these young men who were somehow, this information came out, this video footage came out of a group of young men which seemed to be having a really good time, and they chanted some particular song, seems to be, or something that they were in concert with, and they used the word, the N-word, and they talked about hanging blacks from trees. Now, although this was from the southern portion of the United States, I think it's very symbolic in how some groups really feel about blacks in America. These things are not what we call in a vacuum. That word didn't come to these young men as a sense of other than their thoughts and how they were learned, how they were forwarded. So when the young men chose to use this particular word in the settings of it being private, then for those of us who don't understand or are oblivious or just want to tuck our heads in the sand like ostriches, and that goes for whatever group, white, black, brown, yellow, red, it does not matter. This word in itself is symbolic of subhuman and those who have been labeled subhuman. So if we look at what these young men said and how they said it and what they thought was the privacy of their own circle, then we get closer to how important learned behaviors have become. So these are college-age young men. These are young men who will eventually be professionals, no matter what this particular situation brings from them. They will be able to bounce back. They'll be able to go to another institution. And in some regards, there's a group that literally raised them who understands exactly how they feel. These are their scions. These are their prodigies. These are their children. So when you look at how the term was used, where the term was used, and to what extent this learned behavior festered and multiplied, then we get a little closer to understanding how a very young person will look at this word. A very young person will internalize what it means, how they'll separate, and then they'll label. So when these young men, and it seemed as if this was a party atmosphere, these are just learned behaviors to the point where they felt comfortable enough to use the term in a joking manner, if you will, but the seriousness of the term came out when this particular thought went from just a word to how they would act this word out by saying they would hang from a tree. So when I look to young people, I can never blame the young population for how they feel. The young population, or this particular group, is tied directly to what they've learned, who taught it to them, and more specifically, how they profit from having one group be subhuman while another group is looked to as being human. So these young men, and they said there were young ladies, and I'm sure there were as well, who felt the exact same way. And I'm very content when I say that these words are being used at dinner tables. These words are being used in educational settings. This term is being used in informal situations, formal situations, and the like. So to call a black man a nigger, well, that's par for the course and business as usual. That is what has been deemed for this particular group of people. So for me to become upset, for me to, and that's for all of us who are watching, for those of us who become upset when we hear this word, there's only one word in the entire world that has such a powerful punch towards one group, and everybody across the world, no matter how you say it, in what language, dialect, it's always directed at one group. So we know how powerful the idea of communication and the idea of who profits from the communication. So these young men were definitely reflecting and reflective of their families, of their households, of their communities, of their friendships, of their learned behaviors, of their connection through education, religion, sociology, all the things that our society forwards. These were representative, and they were indeed important to these young men to be able to express these thoughts. So to see a young man express himself in such a way, this in turn allows us to look at society in a more general, especially what we know to be our young, formally educated population. This young man and his friends will eventually be professionals. They will eventually have positions of authority. Now, today, as well as since this news has been blasted across the media, they are really having a difficult time. But as I say that these young men have a difficult time, there's a group that's backing them. There's a group that agrees with them. Their parents are looking for ways to make sure that the punishment that they'll receive will be as minimal as possible. And then we talk about free speech. Should we be able to use that word? Should we be able to use some of the terms that we use for other people? Or should we be able to say exactly what we want as by the First Amendment, which ironically is the name of this particular show. And I have to say that I know that I say some things that are quite controversial sometimes, and that goes to my learned behavior. My father is indeed 83 years old, a very much so a formally educated person who has for years been a champion for the freedom, the justice, and equality of black people. So I understand what learned behaviors are, and I do not remove myself from some of the things that I have said negatively about other groups. This is part of American society. American society, prejudice and racism is as American as hot dogs, apple pie, and baseball. We understand that when we are in our small silos, we talk a little differently amongst each other than we do in public. That is part of America's learned behavior. So to brandish these young men anything other than what they are, and those are just Americans. These are just American thoughts. It would be less than intelligent to think that since 1865, no matter how much we look to it, over what we consider to be completely over 100 years plus, close to 160 years, that there's a difference between the framing of the social atmosphere now than when it was then. So we like to say that we are indeed a society that is post-racial. And one illusion of inclusion is to have a black president. So President Barack Obama is indeed an illusion. He was indeed selected before he was elected, but he has been the most disrespected president. He's been the president that has been under a gun like no other, and looked to from every angle as to be not fit to be to be the president of the United States and hold the highest office in the land. From there down in our society, we see what these young men are saying. We see generally how they feel about blacks in America. And we see the rest of the world who is now saying, yeah, well, that's not right. They should be expelled. They should be put off the campus. But we don't look to the education as being the problem, when education in itself is not only part of the problem, but it is what we know to be one of the stalwarts of American society. And what do we understand in American education? Well, American education in itself is one particular avenue for continued control and the idea of white supremacy. So when these young men use this word, and these young men really understand what this word means, and we are not here to judge their ability to understand, they should be held accountable for what it is they say and what it is that punch packs when you use that word. But let us be very clear, America in itself is perhaps one of the most racist vicinities that one could live in. So to see the vestiges of these young men to be able to produce this particular thought, again, I say to you, some of these thoughts, for these young men just to be able to be accepted in their community, just for them to get along with their friends, and more so for them to get along with their family, they have to agree without equivocation that this is the truth, that these blacks are niggers. Now that word in itself, it turns so many people so many ways. But I say to you, especially for you all who are black, it's not what people call you, it's what you answer to. And when we look at these particular thoughts, we have to be very clear if we're going to have a dialogue that will mean something as far as transforming the way that this word is used or transforming the power that it has. And I really don't see this particular instance or this situation being an avenue to changing anything. There is no way that you can look at this situation and compare it to Mike Brown, and compare it to Eric Garner, compare it to Trayvon Martin. There's absolutely no way. But this is where it starts, because one of these same young men will be a policeman. One of these same young men will be a chief of police. He'll study criminal justice, he'll get a master's degree, and because of his connections with his family and nepotism, he will definitely have a position of authority over blacks who look just like him when he said how he felt about blacks. And he made it quite clear. So it's not the problem of using the word, it's not the problem of these young men being taught that. It's eventually this will come into play and it will be practical. There will be procedures, there will be theories, and then there will be the idea of how they'll carry it out. The danger in all of this is we are teaching a far younger group than them. Some of those young men on that bus have younger siblings that look up to them. Some of them have girlfriends who will eventually be their wives, who will agree with them. Now, the access to a better America through education, well, we're looking right at the college-generated group. We're looking right at them right now and how they feel. And I would not say that this, in turn, is representative of how all young men their age feel. But I will say, and I rest assuredly, there are enough that do. There are enough that right now that in public spaces are saying they don't agree, but they understand exactly why they did it. So there is indeed what we call a separation of thought. Now, for those of us who are my Caucasian audience that are they're listening right now, you make sure that you understand that as you use these words, because of social media, because of our ability to be connected through our electronic devices, you're just going to be held more accountable about what you say, because people could be taping and this could get out and the truth of how you feel could surface. So I don't have issues with those of you all who feel this way. These are your learned behaviors. I don't have issues, but I do have issues with how you carry it out. I can never worry about a man's thinking, although for subjective and also for those who will be in control, they have mastered the idea of mental thought. They have mastered the idea of what's important for continued dominance. And this word in itself represents perhaps one of the most controlled portions of our society. We all know when we hear that word who it's pointed at. So to watch those young men enjoy themselves on what looked like to be a bus, and it looked like to be maybe they were partying, having a few drinks. Well, there's a clear difference between what they will say now and what they will do once they have positions of authority, which will be the trickling down effect of white superiority in American society. So they will eventually be able to put this behind them. Oh, they didn't mean it. Oh, they were just young. No, they meant it. But to just leave that thought that way is incomplete. If you can pay attention, or a term that we use quite often, research the researcher. If you pay attention to how these thoughts were forced upon these young men, perhaps at the dinner table, forced upon these young men, perhaps through Bible study, forced upon these young men through friendships, through networks, then we get to the core of the problem. If you just look to what was said, then you miss completely the learned, targeted population and how they'll carry it along. So when we look at it, and we look at it clearly, it would be very beneficial for all of us to take ownership in what they said. And how about this? To think even more critically, it'll be even better for us to think about what they'll do when they encounter a young Trayvon Martin, when they encounter a Eric Gardner, when they encounter a Mike Brown. And we look to Ferguson. Just the other day, 2 policemen were shot. Well, as Brother Malcolm said about President Kennedy's assassination, he said that was the chickens coming home to roost. I think that we have as a society the ability to separate policemen, and don't get me wrong, not all policemen are bad policemen, but there are enough policemen in concert with some of the most horrific acts on a daily basis that having 2 policemen shot does not add up to the misjustice of character that they carry on a daily basis. Not all policemen, but again, enough policemen with positions of minor authority. So if we look at American society and we tie the word that was used directly to it, we again find America to be one that proclaims to be post-racial, but forwards to us every day the idea of inferiority as a permanent seat for the black man, woman, and child right here in the wilderness of North America. I say to you, how long will you be able to get away with your hypocrisy? How long will you be able to, as a group, continue to force feed your children this racism and not have them deal with hand-to-hand or however you say that they will deal with this particular issue? We need to understand that this younger generation is not like us. So that goes, and it cuts more than one way. And I'm very sure that there is going to be more of these particular instances that will be forwarded to us on the news. There will be more killings of innocent black life by armed policemen. This will in turn be a watershed moment, or will we say it again and again and again and again and again? I have absolutely no qualms in the idea saying that America has been a racist, or the most racist space for blacks in the history and the annals of any sort of antiquity. And it continues. It festers, multiplies, and develops. And as we watch nightly on the news, we find that those who are perpetrating these crimes are far more being brought down, and which means that they are justified. This is just how America is. So America, indeed, as Frederick Douglass said, false to the past, false to the present, and binds herself to be solemnly false to the future. I say to my son in his young age, and those who are younger, and those who will come behind them, yes, indeed, you are very much so at risk. Your life means absolutely nothing on a regular basis, and for you to be snuffed out by an overzealous police officer for whatever reason, somewhere along the line, there may be some justification, but how can you justify your past? America, indeed, is well on her way to her destiny. America will have to answer the color line and the Negro question. And the Negro question reads, what should be done with the presence of the troublesome Negro for maximum exploitation? Well, if you ask those young men on the bus, they said swing them and hang them by the trees. How do you justify that as the formally educated young population? Well, how do you get around how they learn that? I rest assured that America will pay for all its crimes towards the black man, woman, and child. It will, it's not to be, there's no way you can avoid it. Now you can lessen it, and I highly doubt that you will, but you can lessen it by being straight up with the black man, woman, and child, by giving them reparations. And that is indeed a whole nother subject. But we've watched other groups receive reparations, but none for the scions of the transatlantic slave trades who are now, in 2015, still being called niggers. It makes complete sense to me to reinforce white superiority through verbalization, through communication. And this is just how it goes. These are how these particular things are reinforced. I understand fully what to tell my son. There will be no in-between. There can't be a sugarcoating of these lessons. You have to let these young folks hear how these people feel. And then you have to arm them with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding on how to deal with this population. It is indeed difficult for us to even talk about this outside of, oh yeah, this is incorrect. Kumbaya. Let us all hold hands. If that thought isn't as dead as yesterday, then continue to watch the news and find out the next time someone uses that term and is caught. And think more specifically about the times that they're not caught using this same term and the weight that it carries on a regular basis. I understand fully how to explain to future generations their history and who has perpetrated these crimes against them. So indeed, we are at a crossroads, and we will remain at a crossroads until there is some sort of fessing up to the wrong that's been done. I don't foresee it in the near future, but my vision is not that of a prophet. My vision is that of a human who's been under the thumb and the yoke of white superiority and white supremacy since the day I was born. So indeed, my vision is very much so tainted. I do not think that at this point in America, we can call ourselves post-racial when everything is the same in America and these acts are continuously showing up on a regular basis with just what we consider to be those who are regular citizens. And those are the people who drive the force of America and absorb the social atmosphere put forth by the elites. So the elites indeed profit from this. They profited from all of us watching the news. Profit from us talking about it right now. So I say to America, I don't foresee you changing the status of your thoughts about humans and subhumans and who sits in those positions. But I do understand this. I say to white America, your arms are far too short to box with God and his chosen people. Every knee shall bow. You are indeed on the clock. And what it is that we say that we write our book, you will have to bow down to. So your dreaded retribution is forthcoming. And you continue at this pace, and I'm sure the wrath will swing swift, as it always does. I say to everybody listening, please don't be alarmed just by the words. Look to the meanings and the power that these words carry. I understand that it's kind of difficult for us to talk as serious people without sugarcoating it. And I've done my best to talk in an intelligent manner and a scholarly thought about these issues. When realistically, there's a part of me that is definitely a part of my lower self that understands how to deal with my enemy. And indeed, this particular thought does nothing to make future generations better. It would only be a temporary relief, which some folks find enough to carry out acts. I'm just far more civilized, far more serious, and far more attuned to what future black generations will need. So, as we conclude, I just have you think about it in a far more critical manner than what's going to be discussed. Let us all understand America's not post-racial. The racial ideas are multiplying and festering right before your very eyes. And I say to all you liberals and to you people who think that this is wrong, what will you do about it? Well, we don't expect much. Business as usual, par for the course. This is a very touchy subject, and these are just one man's views on how this particular instance played out. Ladies and gentlemen, this information may in no means change your mind, but because truth and you are so very important to me, I just thought you ought to know. I remain, with esteem and respect, a distinguished man of color. Run tell that.